work constructively with our partners in the regions to drive the right outcomes, including a ceasefire.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for the important questions. I can commit that the British Government is fully committed to efforts with our Gulf partners, with our partners across the G7, to try and ensure that the negotiations currently ongoing come to the conclusions that we wish to see. Those are conclusions both in the short term. We have long repudiated Hamas's hostage-taking. The hostages need to be released immediately, as must humanitarian aid get into Gaza. But as I said in response to the Honourable Gentleman's question, there are also other questions about governance and security and the long-term prospects for a Gaza, a West Bank, a state of Palestine and a state of Israel living side by side. And we are fully engaged in that diplomacy, as she would expect. On the wider questions which she points to of fragility in the region, she will be familiar with the decisions that we took in relation to snapback. I imagine we'll return to discuss Iran in greater detail at some point in the future. I'm conscious that there were developments over recess. We have triggered snapback, and we will continue to return to the House to discuss the threat of Iran's nuclear programme.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The longer Israel is allowed to act like a rogue state, bombing sovereign countries with impunity and expanding its war in the Middle East, the weaker our words look. Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, Iran, Syria, Tunisian soil, and now Qatar. Why are we meeting Israel's President Herzog today when his own words and those of Netanyahu show a complete disregard for international humanitarian law?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute to the work of my honourable friend on a whole range of questions, including efforts currently underway to try and ensure the successful evacuation of vulnerable people from Gaza. It is important that we raise our concerns directly with the Israeli government, both in order to try and contribute towards a diplomatic process, but also to try and secure the practical and tangible help required to get people out of Gaza. The British Foreign Office cannot, on its own, secure the speedy departure of those we wish to see.
Andrew Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, do not the events of yesterday underline the critical need to secure a ceasefire, but above all, to move into a political process? And will the Minister commit? We're all very pleased to see that the Minister continues in his role following the reshuffle. Will he commit to try and build on the important work that has been done by Egypt, Turkey, Qatar and Saudi Arabia to affect that peace process? All of them have underlined that there is no place for Hamas in Gaza or anywhere else in government following the events that have taken place.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the kindness of the Right Honourable Gentleman's words and those I heard from behind me as well. I am continuing in my role and will look forward to returning to this House in the usual way. He is right to emphasise the importance not just of the statements and words of the UK and our Western allies, but the very important commitments that have been made particularly in July, but since as well, by Qatar, Egypt, Turkey and a range of other states who have a real role to play in both mediating the immediate pressures and trying to end up in, as he says, the more permanent ceasefire that we want to see.
Florence Session.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Minister for outlining the strongest condemnation of the attacks and a blatant disregard for Qatar's sovereignty. I refer members to my register of interest, having visited Qatar last year and speaking with the ministers there, seeing how diligent they are working day in, day out to secure the ceasefire, secure the hostages and get that urgent aid in. Does the Minister agree and share my view that Qatar's role in mediating this conflict will be blown into jeopardy by these blatant attacks? And will he continue to make sure that the Prime Minister continues to condemn this when he meets with the presidents later this week?
My friend is quite right. Qatar has played a vital role in this conflict, and I work closely with my Qatari counterparts, not just on the urgent issues of the Middle East, but across a whole range of difficult conflicts. They play a vital role. They are committed, as the Emir of Qatar said to the Prime Minister this morning, they are committed to continue to play that mediation role. I cannot see how such strikes could help them perform that role, but they are committed nonetheless to continue with it, and they have our full support.
Kit Maltons.
Mr. Speaker, the events of yesterday come as no surprise to those of us in this chamber who've been raising the Israeli government's crimes committed in an air of complete impunity. And it should now be crystal clear to the Minister, as it is to so many across the world, that the Israeli government is not interested in the slightest in peace or indeed the fate of the hostages. So in that light, I have two questions. First of all, what military and intelligence assistance will we be providing to the Qataris to allow them to defend themselves against further attacks? And secondly, will the UK be adding its voice to the growing calls across the world for the formation of an international protection force to enter Gaza and enforce a peace?
Minister.
On the first point, we are committed to Qatar's security and defence. We have a close relationship with them on both, and we are, of course, in constant discussions with the Qataris about the importance of that collaboration. On the second point, on a protection force, and perhaps taking advantage of the question from the Right Honourable gentleman who was the Secretary of State for the Department for International Development when I was posted in South Sudan with a Chapter 7 UN peacekeeping force at the time with the most far-reaching mandate to protect civilians. We cannot in this chamber pretend that UN peacekeeping forces are able to impose peace where there is none. There must be a ceasefire negotiation. In Juba, I saw, as did the world, the horrifying ethnic cleansing that followed the inability of the UN mission to protect people. You must have a ceasefire. It is easy to get distracted with other alternatives, but the truth is, it is only a ceasefire that will protect civilians in Gaza.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that any preemptive strike under Article 51 is normally regarded as being justified only when a threat is imminent, that Article 2(4) states that all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. And Article 48 states measures taken by members in the exercise of this right of self-defence shall be immediately reported to the Security Council. Does my honourable friend agree that international law and the preservation, strengthening and more of the rules-based system is vital for the peoples of this region, the wider world, our ally Qatar and the UK? And will he make it clear to Israel that we expect them to obey international law?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we do expect Israel, alongside all of our allies, and indeed every state, to abide by international law. He sets out the relevant tests of self-defence and imminence. As I say, the UK is supporting an urgent session of the Security Council this afternoon on this question.
Van Melder.
Mr. Speaker, members of this House have already outlined the reasons why Israel has violated international law by attacking Qatar. Will the UK government therefore lay down a motion at the UN to condemn the actions of Israel?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, the UK is supporting a motion for a session of the UN Security Council this afternoon. If that is granted, I'd expect it to be in the evening our time.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Israel is a rogue state that blatantly disregards international law. This bombing was a blatant attempt to scupper peace negotiations. Pleading with Israel will do no good. So how many more war crimes, how many more violations of international law are necessary before the government imposes the tough sanctions on Israel that are needed to force it to stop this?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've covered the sanctions point earlier in the session.
Bob Black.
Thank you, Speaker. I was surprised but disappointed that there was no word from the Secretary of State in relation to the terrorist attack in Jerusalem on Monday, where terrorists opened fire on a bus, killing rabbis and women. The reality is that Hamas leadership not only condoned the attack, but praised the attack. Does he agree with me that it's essential we get to a point of a ceasefire which agrees with the release of all the hostages without conditions, and Hamas surrendering their weapons and agreeing to demilitarise Gaza?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising the attack in Jerusalem, which I condemn utterly and outright. It was barbaric, as he says. Women and rabbis killed. The UK has no truck with it. We condemn it outright, just as we condemn all such activities by Hamas, the taking of hostages, October the 7th, and the long litany of terrorist attacks which they are responsible for and glorifying.
Mohammed Jassim.
Speaker, Benjamin Netanyahu's extrajudicial killings against a sovereign Western ally exposes his rejection of peace and deliberate escalation of atrocities in a clear violation of international law and diplomacy. He has destroyed the peace talks and acts with impunity. The UK government has rightly condemned these actions, but when will it uphold international law, call out the Israeli Prime Minister as a warmonger and perpetrator of genocide, and end arms sales to Israel and impose the severe sanctions his conduct demands?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister set out some of what our government has done in relation to suspensions of arms sales and sanctions on extremist figures in the Israeli government, and I won't belabour the point here. I would simply say on peace talks, the Emir of Qatar is clear. They will continue in their mediation role. We should not count out peace talks while the Qataris themselves rightly continue to try and push them forwards.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Israel's bombing of Doha was the action of a state which knows it can act with complete impunity. Once again, the Netanyahu regime has shown that international law simply does not apply to them. And for so long as this government ignores the overwhelming evidence of the genocide in Gaza, so it can profit from the sales of weapons to Israel, that situation will continue. So could the Minister tell us, unless of course this is just another example of the performative condemnation we've seen so often from this government, what exactly will the consequences be for Israel for this egregious attack on Qatar?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've set out some of the steps that we are taking in relation to this strike, including supporting an emergency session of the UN Security Council, discussing with our allies, including the E3, which the Foreign Secretary will be doing shortly. I wouldn't wish to be drawn further as we discuss this very important incident with our allies. I would just take issue with the honourable gentleman's characterisation. The conflict in Gaza is not a question that relates primarily with UK arms. We are a tiny supplier of residual arms. We have suspended all of those arms that could be used in Gaza. There are other states with much fuller arms relationships. The honourable gentleman says 15%, when in fact he means 15% of components of the total F-35 supply, not the less than 1%, which is the truth about the total supply to Israel.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is absolutely right to call for a session at the United Nations. Nobody can think that attacking the people trying to broker peace is going to lead to a ceasefire. But ahead of that, this country must have made some assessment of the case for that session and indeed the case for a motion. So can the Minister tell us what the assessment has been made by his officials as to what the civilian casualties and whether this strike explicitly is proportionate under the boundaries of the laws of armed conflict as set out in international law? If we go to the UN, what is the case that we will be making?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't want to be drawn on a casualty tally from the UK. Qatar has, as I set out in my response, been quite clear about their own assessments, and these things tend to develop in the immediate aftermath of a strike. So I won't be drawn on casualties or the numbers of people struck. Qatar, quite rightly, will release that information when they are available. My honourable friend asks about what are the international law tests against which this strike must be judged. They are self-defence and imminence, and in any session of the UN Security Council, those are the tests that we would expect Israel to be able to satisfy.
Sir Julian.
It's not only on this issue, but on many other issues that Qatar, as well as Saudi and other Middle East nations, have developed a real niche and leadership in mediation and conflict resolution. Would the Minister look at our own conflict resolution unit and resources and spend, and now double down on how we are working with the Qataris on all of their mediation efforts?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, which is an important one. The strength of our relationship with Qatar on conflict mediation and our own capabilities are a very important area of work. I myself was a negotiator in the Foreign Office, understand deeply how important it is, as of course was our National Security Advisor. I have been due a further discussion with my Qatari ministerial counterpart. It regrettably is continually delayed by events in the region, but we hope to have it soon.
Abdul Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Qatar is an ally and a key negotiator and mediator in a Gaza ceasefire talks, committing atrocities in Gaza, illegal settlements in West Bank, marching into Syria, attacking Lebanon, Iran, Yemen, and now Qatar. This Israeli government has proven itself to be a rogue ally to us and a dangerous neighbour. Minister, at what point does the UK draw a line in the sand and call out this Israeli government for what it is, a danger to peace in the Middle East?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his long commitment on these issues. I think he has heard my condemnation and that of the previous Foreign Secretary, the current Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister of many of the Israeli government's actions in relation to Gaza and the West Bank and indeed elsewhere. Where we disagree with the Israeli government, we are clear and forceful in saying so.
Charlie Maynell.
Mr. Speaker, given Israel continues to act with impunity, what new levers will our government use within its power to take action such as travel and trade and putting restrictions on those, air and sea delivery, given that land delivery of aid is so appalling, and again, the F-35, we are breaching international humanitarian laws. Can we please stop doing so?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't like to get ahead of the courts on the question of F-35. There was extensive legal argumentation in the Al-Haq case, which did not find in the way the honourable gentleman suggests. On the question of air and sea access to Gaza, both methods have been tried. The UK supported airdrops alongside our Jordanian partners over the summer. Such was our desperation in order to try and get aid into the Strip. But we cannot escape the fact, Mr. Speaker, that airdrops are at best a pinprick in the overall scale of need. There is an aid operation which works, has a track record, and that is the United Nations operation that was operated. Sea was also tried, particularly under the late period of President Biden. It was not found to be an effective mechanism to get aid in. Where we can get aid, even if it is small, we will do so, Mr. Speaker, but I cannot pretend from this dispatch box that any alternate methods other than the land routes and UN support can reach the scale of need that is required.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to see the Minister back at the dispatch box, so whether he's equally as pleased to come back here once again to answer questions about the illegal actions of the Israeli government. Look, we've had a situation here where one of our allies has unlawfully attacked another of our allies. Given we are standing quite rightly with the Qataris in their particular situation, isn't it time we accepted that because of the actions in Doha and also their continued starvation and murder of innocent civilians in Gaza, that we recognise that this right-wing Israeli government and this extreme right-wing Israeli Prime Minister are no longer allies of ours?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his kind words about my reappointment. I recognise the force of what he says in relation to Israeli politics. It's not appropriate for one foreign minister to comment on the internal politics of another country, but you can see from the sanctions that I announced from this dispatch box in June the strength of this government's feeling about, for example, the rhetoric of Mr. Smotrich and the rhetoric of Mr. Ben-Gvir. It has been deeply disheartening to see it repeated over the course of the summer, but where we can, we demonstrate in the strongest possible way the strength of our feeling on these questions.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. The events of earlier this week in Jerusalem and the events yesterday prove, I think, a point that the two extremes in this conflict have actually no interest in peace. Hamas benefits from the violence, and the right wing of the Israeli government also profit as they seek to expand the territory and to subject the Palestinian people. I agree entirely with my right honourable friend from North West Hampshire, and I just wanted to amplify the points that he made. Given the fact that Trump and the American administration now appears to be as annoyed with Israel as the rest of the world following yesterday's events, is it now not time to call Israel's bluff through the United Nations to seek the engagement of blue helmets or some similar force to say we have got as an international community people on the ground. Don't you dare fire into that area. Let us now trigger a talk for peace. Because without that catalyst, those two extremes are just going to continue. And the performative merry-go-round of here we go again, condemnation, another statement, another UQ, is going to continue. And I fear that in 3 or 4 years' time, there will be rubble in Gaza. Israel will be even more of a rogue government, but we will be no further forward.
Minister.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for the question. He is absolutely right about the risks in Gaza. We have seen that rubble grow. The British government would support international forces to go into Gaza with the agreement of the parties. I spoke in response to the member of North West Hampshire of my own experience of the limitations on peacekeeping forces where there is no peace to enforce, and we are depressingly clear-eyed about the continued intent on both sides, in exactly the way that he says, to continue conducting violence.
Steve Woodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the past month alone, Israel has bombed Palestine, bombed Lebanon, bombed Syria, bombed Tunisia, bombed Yemen, and yesterday, for the first time, bombed Qatar. What is the government's legal assessment of the strikes on Qatar, and does it consider them a violation of international law?
Mr. Speaker, we utterly condemn the violation of Qatar's sovereignty in the way that the House heard from the Prime Minister and in words released this morning. In terms of what the international legal tests are, they are, as my honourable friend for rugby set out, to do with imminence and self-defence. There will be a session of the UN Security Council. It will be for Israel to demonstrate how they are consistent with those tests.
Liz Sutherland.
To the day of all days, after an illegal attack on peace brokers Qatar, it is shocking to see the UK put out the red carpet for President Herzog, who's dehumanised Palestinian suffering and incited violence against civilians. His government is being seen to pander to politicians who flout international law. He rightly calls for a ceasefire. When will he call what is happening in Gaza a genocide?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, President Herzog is in the UK on a private visit, so I wouldn't characterise the visit as one in which the red carpet is rolled out. And I would just reiterate, this House, rightly, so many colleagues behind me, but I'm sure in front of me as well, are so conscious of the urgency of helping people out of Gaza, ensuring that aid gets in, and ensuring that there is a ceasefire. President Herzog is the head of state. He is not a functional part of the government. He is an important conduit to raise these concerns. The Foreign Secretary sought this morning, amongst other things, to ensure greater support from the Israeli government in order to get children with injuries, in order to get students out. These are difficult, practical matters on which we are focused. I understand that perhaps the benches over here would prefer that we did not conduct such talks, but the practical problems of helping people in Gaza are what I am focused on, what the government is focused on, and that is what the Foreign Secretary has raised already with the President this morning.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning on Radio 4, an Israeli politician, Fleur Hassan Nahum, offered no apology for the Israeli attacks on Qatar and could not explain what makes Israel exempt from international law and acting with impunity. So how does the Minister justify the genocidal comments of President Herzog. These individuals must be held accountable. And this is not diplomacy, it is shameful complicity. And does the Minister agree with me that today's meeting with Herzog should never have taken place?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I set out the position in relation to President Herzog's visit just a minute ago, and I'm not familiar with the Israeli politician in question, but I can say that the UK considers international law binding on all states.
Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the atrocious terrorist attack in Jerusalem, I have to agree with the Honourable Lady for Walthamstow when she says that blowing up your enemy's negotiators does not exactly suggest an interest in a negotiated solution. But I would like clarification on the government's position about recognition of a Palestinian state. On the 1st of September, the then Foreign Secretary said that he proposed to recognise a Palestinian state, but that Hamas would not benefit from it because they would have to be disarmed. Does this mean that Hamas must be disarmed before recognition, or will recognition go ahead, as seems to be the case, whether Hamas is disarmed or not?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary then and now have both been clear that the Prime Minister will make a determination in advance of the UN General Assembly High-Level Week in accordance with the language set out in the statement of July. The Honourable Member makes important points about what the previous Foreign Secretary said about Hamas's position. We must remember that Hamas are not in favour of two states. They are in favour of one state from the river to the sea, and that is not the position of the British government, nor the position should we take the decisions outlined in the July.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. We all want to see peace, hostages returned, and an end to the man-made famine in Gaza. But this attack on a sovereign nation so closely tied to the peace talk undermines all of that. It's as awful as it is counterproductive, so what can we do to ensure that the pursuit of peace is more than just lip service to the Netanyahu government?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has been a persistent advocate on these questions, and I look forward to continuing to answer his questions from this dispatch box. He shouldn't, though, I think, be more pessimistic about the prospects of continued mediation than the Qataris themselves, particularly given that they are very much on the closest edge to this. We will continue to support them in their efforts. They are vital, and for all the reasons that we have discussed this afternoon, the only way through.
Dr. Ellicher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We keep talking about a ceasefire, but how can one be achieved if one side is intent on killing the negotiators from the other side? Attacking peace negotiators is simply reprehensible. It undermines any possibility of the only thing, dialogue, that has any chance of bringing a resolution to the horrors in Gaza. This isn't the action of a state seeking peace, it's the action of a rogue state operating with impunity outside international law, completely crossing red line after red line. So I ask the Minister again, given that repeated crossing of new red lines, what action will he match his condemnation with? Will he stop all arms sales, all military cooperation, all intelligence sharing, all defence deals, current and potential future ones with Israel? And will he sanction Netanyahu and all officials complicit in the war crimes and genocide in Gaza?
Mr. Speaker, I've set out already in this session our condemnation of the strikes, and I've set out already both in relation to sanctions already taken against extremist figures in the Israeli government, and indeed the other measures that we have taken. In relation to action on that follows from the strike on Doha, the Foreign Secretary will be shortly in touch with her E3 colleagues, and we hope that there will be a Security Council session this evening.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement. I do pray that one day he will come to dispatch box with good news for us, to be absolutely frank. In my surgery at Oxguy's Library on Saturday, a UK Palestinian woman came to see me. She brought date cookies which had been freshly made by her mother. I'd hoped to save one for you, Mr Speaker, but it proved not to be possible. She spoke passionately, and she was really concerned about the visit of the Israeli President to the UK. And I did speak about what the government's been doing, actions that I've supported, which I do believe have saved lives. But I think the actions, what we've seen from Qatar, I think Netanyahu's made a fool of us. And I fear that he's going to continue to make a fool of us. So is it time to change direction, to avoid this happening again? Avoid us taking a stand, asking for a ceasefire, demanding a ceasefire, but Netanyahu just laughing at us?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm disappointed that my honourable friend's constituent didn't reserve a cookie for me, but I'm grateful for the important question that she asks. For the reasons I set out before, it is important that we continue to engage directly with the Israeli government, particularly on those questions like the evacuation of vulnerable people from Gaza, on which their cooperation is essential for any further progress.
Dr. Andrew Morris.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Several of our partners in the region, in North Africa and the Middle East, have expended a great deal of political capital in trying to achieve a rapprochement with Israel in recent years. And he will be aware, for example, of Morocco and its work, its leadership in achieving the Abraham Accords. What does he think this attack has done to them? And what confidence can they have now that Israel is truly embarked on a quest for peace in the region?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, even in advance of the events yesterday, nations in the region who had taken the step of signing the Abraham Accords are signalling disquiet, most obviously and signally the United Arab Emirates, who released an important statement on this question. I will not seek to speak for our Arab allies, but I am sure that they will be looking at the events yesterday with great concern, and I'm sure the honourable gentleman will have seen the number of statements that have issued from the region over the course of the last 24 hours.
Swallow.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A man-made famine in Gaza, increased settler violence in the West Bank, and now this attack on sovereign Qatar. I do fear that these are not the actions of an Israeli government committed to peace. Yeah. With that in mind, can I ask my honourable friend to urge the Foreign Secretary to speak to our friends and allies and find out what more we can do to pile concrete pressure on the Israeli government to get round the table and seek that ceasefire we so badly need.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his commitment to these issues, and I can confirm that the Foreign Secretary is practically, as we speak, in consultations with friends and allies about what further steps we might take.
Dance.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've said this before. So many constituents from Yeovil, some as young as 11, have told me they are so frustrated that Britain is not doing more. Will the Minister reassure my constituents that the government is doing all it can to make sure that these strikes do not break down the peace process completely and enough aid gets into Gaza now?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman's young constituent is absolutely right, and I can reassure her and him that we are doing everything we can to try and ensure that the mediation continues, that progress towards a ceasefire is made, and that, of course, aid gets into Gaza.
Paul Wall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Blessed are the peacemakers, or so we're told, so it seems particularly wicked that Israel can deliberately target the country that's doing more to promote peace than any other in the region. Isn't the tragedy of the Middle East that actually the Palestinians in Gaza and the Israelis in Israel are governed by deeply unpopular extremists who have no interest in peace on either side. And after this week's appalling murder in Jerusalem at the bus stop, the Israeli government imposed collective punishment on the villages where those terrorists came from, and they removed hundreds of work permits and proceeded to start demolishing many, many homes. So doesn't Netanyahu's decision to bomb Qatar prove beyond doubt that he doesn't care about the hostages, that there's much collateral damage as any Palestinian child, and that Israel is now a rogue state, and the UK must have severe sanctions against this rogue state to prove our word?
Minister.
I'm glad to be answering questions to my honourable friend again, who's been a persistent advocate on these questions. The depth of concern about events, of course, the attack in Jerusalem was horrific, as I said to the honourable gentleman from the Conservative Party. The developments in the West Bank, both over the summer and before, are deeply concerning, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising them. We will continue to keep all measures under review, as he would expect. We have taken far-reaching actions, 3 waves of sanctions, which in particular have been targeted on violent settlers, and we will continue to keep such options under review as developments proceed.
Samuel Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, let's look at the facts behind Israel's strike. First of all, we had a bunch of terrorists who have been sitting in the safety of Qatar for years, organising and financing acts of terror, including the mass murder of civilians in Israel this week, and boasting about their involvement in it. Is it not an advance that those people are eliminated and it is made clear to them that they will face the consequences of the terror which they organise? And by showing them that they will be pursued, punished and will not win, is it not more likely you'll drive them to the peace table rather than continue their acts of terror?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've condemned the strikes, and I do so again. They violate Qatar's sovereignty. The question of the facts of the strike will obviously be now contested, and as I said earlier, the Qatari government is releasing those facts as they conduct a full investigation following them. There are, regardless of anybody else, there have been Qatari officials killed in this strike, and it is a violation of Qatar's sovereignty. So for that reason alone, it is worth condemning.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Could I ask the Minister what security information is now shared with Israel, and is the information collected by the more than 600 RAF flights over Gaza being used to guide the Israeli bombardment of buildings in Gaza City and other places? Are we still continuing security cooperation with a country that has bombed almost every neighbouring state over the past year?
Mr. Speaker, for reasons the House will understand, I won't give a lengthy commentary on security and intelligence matters, but I can confirm to the right honourable gentleman that we do not provide any information to aid in targeting strikes in Gaza in the way that he describes.
John Cooper.
Thank you. As a seasoned diplomat, does the Minister recognise that there is a danger here that we're holding Israel to a different standard? When America reached out into Pakistan to snuff out Osama bin Laden, the architect of 9/11, we were taking them to the bar. When Israel reaches out with a precision decapitation strike on the leadership of Hamas, we want to take them to the bar of the International Court.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman does make me feel rather seasoned, as I was in Pakistan at the time. As I said earlier, the tests on international law are self-defence and imminence. Not every state agrees on the thresholds for self-defence and imminence, but it is the expectation of the British government, with all of our partners, allies, indeed every state, that they demonstrate how they are complying with international law, regardless of who they are.
Christy John.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to have the Minister's confirmation that despite yesterday's egregious actions by Israel, Qatar is going to continue its commitment to pursue the peace that we all long for in the Middle East. But to that end, the government has said that before the United Nations General Assembly, it would commit to a state of Palestine if Israel failed to meet certain conditions. Can the government tell us Has Israel failed to meet those conditions? And will the government recognise Palestine as a matter of urgency?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will make a determination on the question in advance of the high-level week of the General Assembly. That is not long now. The whole House can see the development of events in the region and indeed the language we set out in July, and I won't wish to get ahead of the Prime Minister before he makes that determination.
Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My Lib Dem colleagues and I have repeatedly called on the government to introduce further sanctions on Israel, calling for sanctions on Ministers Smotrich, Ben-Gvir and now the Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cabinet. Does the Minister agree these are the people who are responsible for creating a famine in Gaza and continuing the killing of innocent civilians?
Thank you.
Minister.
As we discussed last week, Mr. Speaker, the circumstances of the famine in Gaza are horrifying, and it is absolutely obvious that the restrictions on aid into Gaza, for which the Israeli government are responsible, are contributing very significantly indeed to those circumstances. The Israeli government have raised methodological concerns with the IPC judgment. Those methodological concerns arise from the fact that there is not free access into Gaza. We stand by the IPC, we stand by the judgments that they've made, and it is clear that the restrictions of the Israeli government, on which I have been clear at this dispatch box innumerable times, have seen myself at the border, are responsible for those circumstances.
Ayab Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had a number of ceasefires historically, each one being violated by the Israeli government. This recent attack in Qatar is a clear example that the Israeli government is not interested in a ceasefire. It's interested in a genocide taking over the whole of the Gaza Strip and West Bank. We see that with their actions and with what they say in the public arena. So I asked the Minister, with all the levers that we've spoken about in this House, none have seemed to have had any impact. It's like a toothless tiger that we say we're going to apply this pressure and that pressure, nothing seems to be done. This blatant, unlawful attack on Qatar requires punishment. So does the Minister not think that the immediate recognition, unconditional recognition of a state of Palestine is a form of punishment and would go further to a ceasefire than what we are talking about?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I set out in response to the Honourable Lady's question earlier the process by which we'll make the determination on the recognition points that we set out in July. That point is very soon. The high-level week of the UN General Assembly is just weeks away, so the Honourable Gentleman will have an opportunity to question, I'm sure, me and other members of the government after the Prime Minister has made his determination. I do not think it is right that we should think of recognition as a punishment. It is a reflection of our long-standing commitment to a two-state solution, if that is indeed the determination that we make. And it is unlikely in and of itself to ameliorate the horrifying famine and the many other sources of agony that flow to the Palestinian people at the moment. That does not mean it may not be the right thing to do if the Prime Minister makes that determination, but this House should not think that should we make that determination, that it will necessarily bring any immediate improvement in the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Qatar has used its good offices for diplomatic negotiations for many years. Taliban representatives secretly arrived in Qatar 15 years ago and subsequently attended peace conferences in Japan, Germany and France. If the UK and our allies let these strikes by the Netanyahu-led government go, it could be a precedent for strikes on other intermediaries in the future. How is the government encouraging our allies to introduce sanctions on members of this far-right Israeli government?
Mr. Speaker, I've set out the consultations with our partners that will be happening today and I'm sure over the coming days. He is right about the role of Qatar over the years, including the Taliban talks that took place there for some time, and we've discussed already the questions under international law about states striking other states.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In respect of sanctions, the Minister will be aware that I asked the then Foreign Secretary last week whether he would support making sure that the UK had no involvement in the proposed LBET contract, that's either commercial or governmental, that there is absolutely no use of the Akrotiri air base in Cyprus to the advantage of the Israeli military, and there's absolutely no trade with the illegal settlements in the West Bank. Yeah. Can we confirm that with the change of guard that position remains the same and that he will make sure that it's followed through? Yeah.
Minister.
I can confirm that the British government's position remains that as set out by the then Foreign Secretary last week.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I joined the House in its condemnation of the attacks against civilians in Jerusalem this week. The impunity and military support afforded to the State of Israel over the past 77 years, and as it carries out the ongoing genocide in Gaza and wider Palestine, has emboldened its leaders to launch assaults in Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Tunisia, and now Qatar, killing thousands and forcing millions there to flee their homes across the region. Is the Minister not concerned that the British government's continued support for a rogue state perpetrating repeated violations of international law will lead to Israel invading other countries and undermine the UK's security and credibility on the world stage? And does he agree that Qatar has a right to defend itself against this unprovoked illegal attack?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have set out our position in relation to a whole range of Israeli government actions with which we disagree. So I'm not sure I would characterise our position in the way that he did. And I've set out our position on the relevant questions of international law already, as far as I'm able.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm whether the Attorney-General will publish any advice he or the Government have received on whether there has been breaches of international law during the conflict in Gaza? Thank you. Yeah.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that's more properly a question for the Attorney-General. I think there's been some correspondence between him and his shadow, but I'll revert on what the latest Attorney-General's position is on that question.
Shocker Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After having witnessed the Israeli army massacre over 60,000 people in Gaza, 19,000 of whom are children, the blood-soaked tentacles of the Israeli army are now reaching closer to home, especially in my case. Yesterday afternoon in Doha, my niece, with her daughter, was spending loving times together in the library when the bomb by the Israeli army, which this government fails to condemn as committing a genocide, dropped a bomb 2 to 3 streets away from where they were. The building shook, smoke everywhere, and up till this point, my niece's baby is still asking, will it happen again? So I asked the Minister, will it happen again? And what is this government going to do beyond empty words? When are we going to call for a complete and utter arms sales, completely stopping every single arms sales to Israel, impose economic, political and social sanctions, and use all its power to get aid in desperately into Gaza?
Yeah. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've answered these questions on arms and sanctions already in this session. I want to be clear. We have condemned these strikes. We do not want to see them again. We are discussing these matters with our allies, including, we hope, at the Security Council this evening. We will no doubt keep the House updated as how those discussions go.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all thank the Minister for his very confident replies to the questions today and wish him well in the role that he plays. And these things are never easy, but the Minister, I think, has done quite well. Loss of life is regrettable, of course, in all situations. This House must also condemn the callous murders of 6 innocent Israelis, including 2 rabbis and women, the day before the attack in Doha took place. Does the Minister acknowledge that UK must share pertinent intelligence with Israel to ensure that targeted attacks take place so that Israel can cut the head off the Hamas snake. And then and only then can there be peace for Israel and Gaza by ensuring that the Hamas threat is targeted, eradicated and effectively.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his kind words. I've set out clearly our absolute opposition to Hamas on a whole range of questions, but I've also set out our understanding of international law, why we condemn these strikes and why we do not want to see them repeated.
Right, that completes the urgent question. We'll move on to the next one. From bench change over.
In the House and a very serious topic to be discussing. Last night, as we know, Poland shot down multiple Russian drones that had entered its airspace. Poland stated that the drones were part of a coordinated Russian attack on targets across the border in Ukraine, but it's a barbaric attack on Ukraine that they go through every evening, but this is an unprecedented violation of Polish airspace. Deep enough, indeed, for Warsaw Airport to be closed. I would like to thank, in particular, the Polish and NATO air defence forces for responding rapidly and effectively to protect the alliance. The areas affected were border regions in Belarus, on the border of Belarus and Ukraine. Poland temporarily closed the airspace and some airports. Emergency alarms were issued for the regions affected, but airspace and most airports have now, luckily, reopened. Mr. Speaker, Russia's actions are absolutely and utterly reckless, unprecedented and dangerous. It serves to remind us of President Putin's blatant disregard for peace and the constant bombardment of innocent Ukrainians face every day. In response, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk has announced that Poland will request to invoke Article 4, NATO Article 4, which allows any ally to consult with others when they believe their territorial integrity, political independence or security is threatened. The Prime Minister has been in contact with Prime Minister Tusk to make clear, absolutely crystal clear, the UK's support for Poland and that we will stand firm in our support for Ukraine. The Defence Secretary is meeting E5 counterparts today and will discuss what additional support we can provide, including to reinforce Ukraine and strengthen NATO, and we stand in full solidarity with our ally Poland. We condemn this action. We say to Russia, your aggression only strengthens the unity between NATO nations. Your aggression only strengthens our solidarity to stand with and beside Ukraine. It reminds us that a secure Europe needs a strong Ukraine. With our allies and partners, and through UK leadership of the coalition of the willing, we will continue to ramp up the pressure on Putin until there is a just and lasting peace.
Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. Can I begin by expressing our total solidarity with the people of Poland? As the opposition, we stand shoulder to shoulder with the government in support of our strong NATO ally. Hear, hear. Poland is a great nation and a great friend of Britain. Our thoughts are with their people, and we fully support all efforts to rally our NATO allies and ensure that Poland's invocation of Article 4 is responded to in the swiftest possible time. This is an unprecedented violation of Polish and NATO airspace that must be met with total condemnation and a robust response. So must the latest bombings of Ukraine, as Russia continues to target civilians and conduct an unprovoked war of aggression without any regard for human life. Can the Minister share with us what, if any, judgment they have been able to form on the precise motivation for this drone incursion? If it is the case that this was designed to test NATO's resolve, is it not the case that Putin will have already seen how strong that resolve is to stand united against this aggression? We understand Dutch F-35s were directly involved in supporting the Polish military response and that fighters from other NATO nations may have been scrambled. Is it not sobering to reflect that the F-35s from the Netherlands followed us in rotating air support for Poland, and therefore that if this incursion had occurred just weeks ago, RAF Typhoons could have been directly involved?
On the specifics of our joint NATO response, can the Minister say more about what invoking Article 4 means in practical terms for the UK and our allies, and what the next steps are? Importantly, can he outline what discussions the UK government has had with our US counterparts on these developments? And above all, given that this incident involved use of lethal Russian drones against a fellow NATO member, what further steps is the government now considering to constrain Russia's ability to threaten our closest allies and to provide further support to Poland? Finally, in light of the Norway deal, the Minister will be aware that one of the largest ever defence export deals concluded under the previous government was the sale of ground-based air defence to Poland. In the week of DSEI, doesn't this show why such industrial collaboration with our allies is important not just economically but in defending our close allies? And to conclude, there are those who may question the nature of the Russian threat or question the need to significantly increase defence spending. But these events should leave nobody in any doubt that the threat extends beyond Ukraine, and therefore that we must continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, with Poland and all our NATO allies.
Minister Cairns.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for his response and also the bipartisan support for what is a really serious issue. So what is NATO Article 4? For clarity, Article 4 is a consultation mechanism. If an ally perceives its territorial integrity, its political independence or its security is threatened, it can invoke Article 4, and that's what Poland has done. Discussions would then take place in the North Atlantic Council, NATO's senior political body, of which the UK will absolutely and of course be involved. I mentioned early on in my speech the status of the attacks. Poland stated that the drones were part of a coordinated Russian attack on targets across the border in Ukraine, but that doesn't in any way, shape or form excuse those attacks. Those attacks are an unprecedented violation of Polish airspace and unprecedented scale. And then I would just like to confirm that I agree that the industrial collaboration we have with our allies and partners is absolutely essential as we move forward, as NATO moves forward, and as our partners and allies' relationships move forward, to make sure that we are prepared in any way, shape or form for an escalation or indeed an existential crisis should it come across us. We're doing a huge amount to lead our allies and partners with response to Ukraine. Just as we speak, the Secretary of State is with the E5. He is talking about the coalition, the willing. He's talked to Poland representatives already. And of course, we're leading the way in that coalition, its formation, its structure, and of course, how it's going to deploy, should it need to do so if peace ever comes to Ukraine.
Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Minister's statement? Isn't it the case that this again is another example of what Russia really believes in, and that is complete annihilation of Ukraine? It doesn't care what collateral damage it does elsewhere, although I believe this was a deliberate move by the Russians in terms of sending drones across into Poland, and I welcome what the Polish response and the NATO response was. But isn't this an example of where really we need to be talking about ramping up support for Ukraine in terms of industrial cooperation, in terms of making sure they get more munitions, more equipment, quicker and better, and ramping up sanctions as well. And may I add one final thing? I think we need to consider with the budget coming up how we ramp up and increase further defence spending ahead of the recent targets being set out.
Minister Cairns.
So I'd like to thank the honourable friend for his question and also his support for defence as a whole. I completely agree that the Ukrainians are going through a serious violation of international law by a barbaric and reckless leader within Russia. They are feeling and experiencing bombing, drone attacks, ballistic missile attacks, which you can't hear, subterfuge, sabotage, hostage-taking, and huge, large-scale kidnapping of children. Air raids go off every night in Ukraine, reminiscent of World War II. The wailing of those sirens just alone have a psychological impact that will last long after any war finishes. So why today is this happening? Well, it's because of Putin's barbaric, unprovoked, illegal invasion of a sovereign state. And we must continue to do the maximum amount to ensure that we support Ukraine and encourage their allies and partners. But we have done a significant amount. If you will recall, the last UDCG, we did a 50-day drive to deliver more for Ukraine. 50 days on from that, We had 5 million rounds of munitions, 60,000 artillery shells, rockets, missiles, 2.5 thousand uncrewed systems, 30 vehicles, 200 electronic warfare and defence systems. And then on top of that, we had a 70 million plan to provide 350 air defence missiles, and then finally 150 million to provide air defence and artillery. We are at the leading edge. We have been for a long time in supporting Ukraine, and we will continue to do so long into the future.
I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Overnight, Poland faced down an unprecedented violation of NATO and Polish airspace. The latest act of belligerence by a Russian dictator hell-bent on recreating the Russian Empire. This is a stark reminder that history cannot repeat itself. These drones were part of Russia's latest large-scale assault on Ukraine, where 450 drones were launched. And we thank the Polish Air Force for protecting the NATO alliance, and we stand with our allies. No matter what President Trump believes, it's clear that Putin is not stopping. And he is not considering peace, he is testing NATO's limits. A line has been crossed, and we must collectively stand up to this aggression. This government must take tangible action. So will the Minister take forward the Liberal Democrat proposals to end the import of products processed from Russian oil in third countries, stop UK companies shipping or ensuring Russian liquefied natural gas, and push for a further cut to the oil price cap? As Tusk said this morning, actions speak louder than words. The strongest action that we could take would be to seize the frozen Russian assets across the UK. So will the Minister commit to doing that today?
Mr Cairns.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for her contribution and, of course, her support for defence. I think she brought up a really valuable point, that those that don't read history are doomed to repeat it. This was an unprecedented attack. It was unprecedented violation of Polish airspace. We are working exceptionally hard with the Polish to ensure they have everything they need, and indeed our broader NATO alliance. We already have significant sanctions on Russia. And I know there's work going on between the Department, the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Office to look how we can move that forward, and we'll update you in due course.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The appalling attack on Ukraine and the violation of Polish airspace yesterday simply highlights the increasing and devastating use of drones in modern warfare. I've been contacted by Hartlepool constituents today expressing their anxiety and fear as to what this might mean for our shores. So could the Minister share the plans of the government to ensure that the UK's drone and air defence capabilities meet the challenge of the changes we're seeing in modern warfare?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for his friend for his contribution, and you'll know that I'm pretty passionate about the need for us to increase our uncrewed systems portfolio. We've already committed within the Defence Industrial Strategy and in the SDR to create an uncrewed centre of excellence that will help us rewrite our doctrine and concept, but also integrate drones back into the military and ensure we have a high-low mix of 5th and 6th generation capability massed with low-end, hopefully, uncrewed systems. Every night, night on night, we have seen an increase in drone attacks on Kyiv and cities from Dnipro to Zaporizhia and to Kherson and back again. It is increasing on an unprecedented scale. Some could argue that Putin has been emboldened recently, but we are seeing it increase, and we must do everything we possibly can to support the Ukrainians.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I recommend the honourable gentleman's statement just now and about our support for Poland. Of course, we have to support Poland, and it's quite right that we should do so. But I'd like to return him to the main issue here, which is Russia's intense bombing attacks on Ukraine. I recently came back from Ukraine, and you could, every night in Kyiv and Lviv and the other towns, people are being killed by this brute. So the question really remains for us, this is just an example of what is going on across the border at a greater scale. So I ask the government, have they really made overtures to the US President to say the time is over for these constant statements that we may do something, we will do something, we will do some sanctions? Surely now we have to get the US to massively up the level of sanctions, which is what Russia fears. Also, European nations have now got to be told you cannot buy any more oil or gas that has been run through India or wherever. That has to stop. We have to make that work, and we have to make sure that at the end of it all, that Russia now pays a penalty right now, and I understand it. And will the British government please take this opportunity when the President comes over? Enough is enough. Please act and get this thing done.
Minister.
So I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member for his contribution and his stalwart support both on defence issues and issues of foreign affairs. Our sanctions programme has been pretty impressive to date, and I can almost guarantee that when the US comes over, there will be discussions on a whole range of topics, of which Ukraine will probably be central to it, alongside other issues within the UK. Imposing a penalty on Russia is exactly what we have done, and actually Bipartisan, when the last government was in, led the way on. We led the way on equipment into Ukraine, and we are continuing to do that. We've seen a huge uplift in the amount of resources going into Ukraine, both financially and, of course, weapons, but importantly, industrial build across Europe. And that's not just in the UK, that's across all of our European nations, because industry is required to maintain the pace, the scale of this conflict, which I think have caught people out in the past.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I follow on the question from the Right Honourable Gentleman? The reality is that Putin's got emboldened, hasn't he, since he met President Trump. No longer is the pressure for an immediate ceasefire, only we'll get to a long-term, distant peace arrangement, which is not going to happen, as we all know. And the threat of further sanctions from the US, which he was really frightened about, has now apparently been taken off the table. So when President Trump comes over here, can my honourable friend engage with our colleagues in the Foreign Office to try and put pressure on President Trump to say we should recognise that the one thing that can be done now to get President Putin to back off and properly look at a ceasefire is further sanctions from the US to marry those that ourselves and European colleagues have put on?
Minister.
I would like to thank the honourable friend for his contribution, and that's three different people that have talked about sanctions, so it absolutely has sunk in, and we will discuss this with our cross-government colleagues in due course. I would not underestimate the ability of the Americans to act. It's down to the American people and American government to decide so, but I wouldn't underestimate it over the short, medium or long term. And I think one of the key points we have here, by having a US visit of such a level, gives us the opportunity to discuss these issues in person and really highlight what's important to us. And it talks to the importance of being in the tent to have these discussions, both as a government and everybody and every party in this wonderful place.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let's be clear, it's no accidental violation of NATO's airspace, of course Poland's airspace, but as NATO members, one could argue it's actually a violation of our own airspace. And is it not clear that Russia is testing NATO's resolve, and Putin will ruthlessly exploit any real or perceived diplomatic, military or political weakness? And I get the Minister's point on calibration and proportionality. I get that. But what does a robust response mean? And following on from the earlier question from the Labour benches, what about UK air defences, given there are many, many Russian ships in the English Channel and around all of these isles where drones can easily be deployed?
Minister.
So I'd like to thank the honourable member for his contribution. The intelligence agencies will be able to provide the best analysis on this, so I'm not going to jump to conclusions as to the intentions of this attack. But it has been clear over several years now that there has been consistent testing of NATO as a whole, whether that's 20,000 cyber attacks from hostile states in the last 2 years, whether that's the use of chemical radiological weapons on UK soil, and to name a litany of other incidents. When it comes to the strategy, I fully support the Ukrainian strategy of fight and talk, and to keep the pressure on the Russians to ensure that they come to the table. And I fully support a US-led peace process, but it must be central to the Ukrainians' view, and they must lead it from their perspective.
Oliver Ryan, after which I will call Steve Darling. Oliver Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I'm glad to hear the Minister's resolve, and indeed the whole House's united condemnation and shock at these outrageous attacks. The UK must stand firm for NATO, with Poland and Europe, and increase our support actually for Ukraine and neighbours including Estonia, Latvia, Finland, Lithuania and elsewhere. What steps has the Minister taken, I think following on from the question before, to review our own defences in light of recent events?
Minister.
So, first of all, we are fully in support of our NATO allies and also, of course, our Baltic allies. The last time Article 4 was invoked was 2022, and that was by many of our Baltic allies, and that was on the invasion of Ukraine. It's been invoked 8 times, and the most recent one, obviously, this morning. When we talk about air defence, I'm not going to give the details of our operational capabilities here, but we have a suite of capabilities. What I would say, if you were to read the Strategic Defence Review, the Defence Industrial Strategy, there's a large proportion on industrial rebuild here in the UK and supporting our allies with joint ventures and partnerships to re-establish the military-industrial base of Europe in these unprecedented times. Central to that will be air defence.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I understand that Ukraine holds approximately 190 billion frozen Russian assets. Press reports today suggest that they are showing a level of flexibility in their stance of releasing them as long as they get some legal guarantees from the European Union around risks that they may face. Is the government supporting the European Union to unlock this opportunity that could help support efforts in Ukraine?
Minister.
Thank you, the honourable member, for his question. We support the ability to get resources into Ukraine in any way, shape or form. On this specific matter, I will take that away with both the Home Office and our cross-government colleagues and get back to you specifically on the answer.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our constituents with links to Poland will be understandably terrified at last night's development, but they will also be reassured that the Polish people, just as the Ukrainian people, do not stand alone. NATO Supreme Headquarters confirmed that last night we saw not just Polish air defence, but Dutch F-35s, German Patriot batteries and Italian early warning aircraft all involved in the mission. Now, the EU High Commissioner has talked about increasing their involvement in the Eastern Shield project, which we are already part of. Can the Minister update this House about his conversations with our European counterparts about last night and what more we will do to stand with the Polish and the Ukrainian people? Minister.
I'd like to thank the member for her question. And first of all, I'd like to thank both Polish and NATO air defence forces for the disrupting that attack that took place yesterday. As you'll know, the Defence Secretary is with the E5 at the moment, and they've discussed a specific issue. And as we look forward, we are working towards a bilateral defence and security treaty with the Polish.
Ben Obsijekti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I recently visited the Royal Air Force in Poland during their recent deployment in the enhanced NATO air policing role on Obchesman and saw firsthand RAF Typhoons scramble to intercept a Russian SIGINT Kut Alpha. Poland feels the threat from Russia much more keenly than I think we appreciate in this House.
Very good point.
I raised in the drones debate last week with the Minister that we have a paucity of counter-UAS capability. Whilst we obviously don't face the risks that Poland do or have plans such as Shield East, what steps is the government taking to ensure our own territory, critical infrastructure and military bases, both here and overseas, each possess an organic capability that can be brought to bear?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the member for his question. We need to have an integrated air defence system with our European and NATO allies, absolutely, and we must also look after our critical national infrastructure. That's why the SDR and the Defence Industrial Strategy really has a focus on that industrial rebuild, of which a part of that is air defence. We're also working with our Ukrainian allies to learn from them best practice and pull that back to here in the UK.
Moon.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, the shocking escalation of hostilities by Russia is not only a deliberately provocative act, but threatens all NATO states. An ironclad response is now required. Will the Ministry, with NATO partners, be unequivocally reminding Russian and Belarusian counterparts of NATO Article 5 and that an attack on Poland is an attack on all NATO partners, including the United Kingdom?
Minister.
So we will absolutely do that. It's worth noting Article 4 and Article 5 are not linked, but nevertheless, we will be going all out to remind all of our allies and partners of the severity of this situation and, of course, the continuing barbaric nature of Putin's invasion of Ukraine.
Charlie Maynard.
Could the Minister outline what this government is doing to highlight and explain to the citizens of our country what our obligations are to Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia and all of our NATO allies under Article 5, and the role that the Joint Expeditionary Framework plays, or force plays, with the Baltic 3, Nordic 5, Netherlands and the UK? Thank you.
Minister.
I think the member brings up a really important point. One of the biggest impacts to cost of living across this country is the war with Ukraine and Russia. It's having a second, third order effect that affects everyone in the country. I think it's really worthwhile reminding our citizens of that. That if Article 5 were being enacted, that we would have an obligation to defend. And that is so important when we look at focusing on our foreign policy and where we need to prioritise our resource.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK and Poland have a very close defence and security relationship, and they are one of our most important European allies. So what plans does the Minister have to strengthen this relationship and that with our other allies? And does he agree that we need to do all we can to calmly make clear to our population here that the defence of the free world is being tested and that we all need collectively to be resolute in our response?
Minister.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for the question. For 24 years in the military, I've never seen it so fractious or fragile as it is, particularly today. And I think it's on all of us to make sure the population understands the risk and the geopolitical environment that surrounds us and gives us a standard of living that we have here in the UK. When it comes to Poland, we're working towards a bilateral defence and security treaty with them, which will deepen ties and industrial partnership.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I believe this was a deliberate attack by Putin to test the resolve and the resources of NATO, and we will see more of these in the coming weeks, months and years. What I've also seen is that Russia were very quick on disinformation and pumping the airwaves in the cyberspace. Can we ensure that we're providing all resources to counter disinformation, because it is a battle space on its own, and ensure that we are ramping up with the current threat that Russia is pushing out across NATO countries?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable and gallant member for his contribution and his support to defence affairs. It's worth reminding us, and sometimes we're quite disparaging, that NATO is the most effective military alliance ever seen in history. And its numbers and its capacity far outweigh some of our adversaries. One of the areas I do believe they have a fantastic command capability is information operations, but actually we all collectively as members of Parliament play a part in it. And that's by taking the messages that we have today and making sure our nation and individuals within our constituencies understand the second and third order effects of potential escalation.
John Woodcock.
Thank you very much. For many years, Banbury has been home to thousands of Polish citizens who will understandably be very concerned at events over the past 24 hours. Can the Minister reassure them that not only is our relationship with Poland steadfast, but that this government is taking steps to strengthen it in spite of Putin?
Minister.
The one thing that Putin's actions have done is they pull NATO together, they forge alliances, they forge partnerships, and they focus us in on the barbaric nature of Russia's aggression. I've worked with the Polish in the past. We have a great relationship with the Polish. They are increasing defence spending. There are industrial opportunities there. And of course, we have great cultural ties with Poland, whether that goes to the Polish serving in the Air Force in the Second World War, all the way through to the latter years. So we are fully behind Poland, our allies and our partners.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first congratulate and salute the brave air crew that intercepted this flagrant breach, not just of Poland's airspace, but of international rules-based order. I don't believe for one second that this was some inadvertent mistake. I think this is classic Russian playbook. They were probing NATO in that attack, and they'll continue to probe until they come up against the resistance that they deem worthy of a change in policy. Russia responds in two ways. One is for strength and one is for weakness. And if they see weakness, they will continue. So can the Minister help us understand in the House what that robust response to that flagrant attack will look like?
Minister.
So as I mentioned earlier, when these incidents take place, it forges the alliance and it focuses it, and it takes away any friction because we create unity of effort. And so it's a mismove by Putin to think that it doesn't really make NATO stronger. And if we're looking at sort of deterrence, whether it's by punishment or denial, one, Ukraine is holding back one of the biggest militaries in the world, and they are being punished, 1 million casualties. And then denial is greater NATO unity and focus on the aggressor that is Putin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This attack by Vladimir Putin on a NATO member and one who's been a leader in resisting Russian aggression and supplying Ukraine is a clear escalation and attempt, as others have said, to probe NATO defences and intimidate the alliance. Can the Minister assure me that the UK and NATO will not be intimidated and that the Government is considering robust military options to stand up to this bully in Moscow? And closer to home, can he assure me that these attacks will also confirm the urgency to escalate and accelerate our own development of the Type 83 frigate and future air defence system so our country is fully protected in the future as well?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable friend for his contribution to defence. He's a stalwart champion of both Ukraine and defence as a whole. I have never been intimidated in my life. We as a country will not be intimidated. We will not be intimidated, and neither will NATO. And I would just like to reiterate our defence industrial strategy is absolutely critical. Giving weapons to Ukraine is one thing. Building industrial capacity to generate mass is actually how you win wars should you be caught up in one. And that's why the SDR's first 70 pages are all about industry.
Sir Oliver Dowden.
In the Minister's excellent response, he talked about the geopolitical situation. During my time in office, I saw more and more cooperation between Russia, China, North Korea and Iran. And he talked about the emboldenment of Putin. Does he share my concern that the recent show of unity at the Organisation for Shanghai Cooperation summit in China may well have emboldened Putin? And in response to that, it should be a wake-up call for Western democracies, all Western democracies, to stand together in defence of their mutual values.
Minister.
So I absolutely agree that we must stand together for those mutual values, whether that's the right to independence, the right to self-determination, collective security, etc. Yes, he may feel emboldened, but I would argue his actions today has actually strengthened the alliance. It really does galvanise, and I can guarantee the discussions with the E5 and NATO that take place will be absolutely focused at Russia. And that then drives economic growth, it drives spending into defence, and so I would argue it's not just a shot across the border, but a shot in the foot from Putin.
Mr Nash, if you are finally comfortable in the chamber, you seem to have bounced around every seat on the back row. Are you ready to ask a question? James Nash.
I apologise for moving. Poland is one of our closest European allies with a long shared history, and in my region of the East Midlands, that is embodied in our large British-Polish community, whose roots go back over 80 years. In light of last night's attack, what are the government's plans to strengthen our deterrence on NATO's northeastern flank?
Minister.
I think Poland is one of our strongest allies. Poland is interestingly building one of the biggest land forces in Europe. Its recapitalisation programme is of a significant scale because it has a large, obviously, land border. And so, from my perspective, working with them towards that bilateral defence and security treaty is absolutely essential from our perspective due to the industrial and bilateral benefits that will bring. We stand side by side with the Polish. No questions, no doubts. And we stand absolutely at the centre of NATO defence policy.
Manuela Petgala.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon, we also have a large Polish community who have been alarmed to see Russian drones violating Polish airspace. We all know that if Ukraine were to fall to Putin's aggression, Poland would be next in his sights. How is the government intending to support Poland in defending its sovereignty, and what steps is the government taking to strengthen our own security?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for her contribution and thank the Polish members of our constituency for supporting Poland during these times. We have a multitude of different capabilities we've had in Poland that have rotated through. For example, as mentioned by the opposite benches, was our NATO enhanced joint air policing, which just stopped a couple of months ago and was rotated around. We also have a light cavalry squadron there working with the Polish and the US as well. But they are also a central pillar to the coalition, the willing, as we move forward. So everything is done by, with and alongside our Polish allies.
Jacob Collier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I join the Minister in his condemnation of this clear escalation against our Polish allies? My honourable friend will know that in my constituency of Burton and Uttoxeter, we have a large Polish diaspora who are extremely concerned about their country and fearful of further Russian attacks. What assurances can he give to the Polish community in my constituency but across the country, and what work will he do across government to support the Polish community at this difficult time?
Minister.
The assurance we can give is that NATO is the most effective military alliance of all time, and Poland, the UK and our allies sit central to that. The centrality of that alliance is the best form of deterrence and therefore the best form of assurance to both people in your constituency and across the whole NATO alliance, and is central to our defence policy as we move forward.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Speaker, President Zelensky has been consistent in his argument that the invasion of his country is just the beginning and that we are all in the crosshairs. And he made that argument very forcefully, famously, in the Oval Office. Does the Minister not agree with me that what has happened in relation to this violation of Polish and NATO airspace completely vindicates President Zelensky?
Minister.
So I've met President Zelensky several times, and I'm a keen observer of the conflict as it's moved forward. 1 million Russian casualties, a 40-kilometre dead zone on the front line that would reflect any battlefront or front line from the First World War to the Second World War. What is happening there is absolutely atrocious. And I always am really clear that deterrence, yes, peace, yes, but appeasement, no.
Kevin Bonavia.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like the honourable member for Huntingdon, I was also part of the excellent Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme visit to Operation Chessman in Poland earlier this year. And I also saw the scrambling of our RAF Typhoon jet going up in the sky to check out suspicious Russian air activity. Now, that was a surprise to me, but speaking to RAF personnel, found that was actually quite common at the time. And then later on, speaking to our Polish counterparts, this is what they are facing in Poland, and the public there are well aware of the Russian threat. Here in this country, I'm not so sure the British public quite get how serious this threat is. They in Poland are on the physical front line. People in Ukraine are paying the horrible price of Putin's aggression. Can the Minister reassure this House and the public that this government is doing all it can to deal with the Russian threat in terms of cyber attacks, its grey warfare on Europe and indeed this own country?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable friend for his question. I think he points on a really important point. We must not alarm the nation. We must not scare the nation. We must be honest with the nation as to the risks, the threats that are posed towards us, our defence, and indeed the citizens of this country. And we need to be clear with that. And that's why, so interestingly, within the Strategic Defence Review, you'll see some talks about military intelligence and the review going on, because we've got to make sure if we're going to explain to the population why we're spending more defence, that it's related to those threats. So we're going to clearly explain it. The SDR has stated that, and then we're going to double down on investment in defence industry to ensure we can provide the assurance that we can contribute to NATO in an absolutely above and beyond meaningful way.
Gavin Robinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in November 2022, the Honourable Member for Witness, the Honourable Member for Angus and myself were in Ukraine with the Defence Select Committee when there was an onslaught of rockets fired into that country, one of which errantly fell into Poland and killed 2 Polish nationals. That day, Poland considered triggering Article 4, and today, clearly, they have done so. But in the intervening almost 3-year period, there has been a growing reluctance to equip Ukraine to defend their skies, and importantly, defend their skies from the skies. So whilst this Article 4 meeting of Member States will consider how we protect the skies of NATO, can the Minister confirm that he's willing to extend that conversation as to how we appropriately and effectively defend the skies of Ukraine?
Minister.
A great question from an individual who I know is a stalwart supporter of defence. There is from my perspective, as we move forward with the Strategic Defence Review, Defence Industrial Strategy, to ensure that we revitalise our defence industry so we can produce, importantly, a mix of high-end systems that can act as high-end air defence, but also low-end systems that can be used in an economic mismatch between cheap and high-end systems. And getting that mix is complicated, but I absolutely know within both the Defence Industrial Strategy and the SDR, we're intent to ensure our British military is equipped with that high, low-end mix of 5th and 6th gen and mass-produced hardware in due course.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I entirely agree with the Minister when he says that NATO is the most successful defensive alliance in history. But the reason for that is that until recently, the commitment of the United States to NATO was never in question. It is in question now because of the nature of the incumbent of the White House. Either President Putin has some sort of hold over Donald Trump about which we do not know, or it's because he successfully flatters him. So when President Trump is in the country, can we point out to him in the strongest possible terms that if, after having had the red carpet rolled out for the killer in the Kremlin, this is the response a couple of weeks later, that shows that Russia is showing nothing but disrespect to the White House and to its occupant.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for his continued support to defence. The United States has been really clear that it would like European nations to spend more on defence. It obviously has a multitude of different threats that it has to deal with. What I would say is the US President comes to the UK, we are in the tent. We're going to sit down with him and we will discuss these issues in detail.
Jess Brown-Fuller.
My respect for the bravery of the Ukrainian children, Vladimir, Valeria and Roman, who came to Parliament last night to share their stories as survivors of Putin's war of aggression. Putin's action last night over Polish airspace was a deliberate move to test NATO's reaction, and the response must match the moment. So will the Minister please push for a cohesive plan to seize those frozen Russian assets and funnel them to support the humanitarian mission to support Ukrainians' incredible and inspiring future generation?
Minister.
My heart goes out to both those children and everyone in Ukraine who's going through this and has done for several years now. And I can guarantee the honourable member that there are discussions ongoing now about how we can push the system more to pressure Russia into coming towards the peace table.
Deputy Speaker, the Minister agreed with my honourable friend that industrial collaboration between the UK and Poland is an important part of our relationship. A key part of this is primarily focused on ground-based air defence, and these events surely underline why that is so critical to ourselves and our allies. So can he just say what progress there has been on the UK-Poland joint Future Common Missile Programme to create longer-range ground-based air defence for both nations?
Minister.
So I don't have the detail on the industrial partnership. I can write back to you in due course. Air defence is critical, as is making sure that we can secure our oceans, our subsurface and, of course, land.
Minister.
Deputy Speaker. It's good that across this House there is universal recognition that last night was an attack not just on Polish airspace, but on NATO airspace. And in terms of the response, could I bring the Minister back to the question of sanctions? We have sanctions on Russian crude oil, though sadly there's at least one NATO country which doesn't implement that. But in terms of refined oil, are we not in this country importing considerable quantities of Russian crude oil refined down. And in the recent trade deal with India, was there any attempt to put any restraint upon that?
On the latter point, I will engage my cross-government colleagues and look into the detail. What I would say is putting pressure on Russia is absolutely our priority to bring him to the peace table in due course, and we're working exceptionally hard to deliver that.
James McClary.
The Minister was quite right to describe this violation of Polish airspace as unprecedented, but I'm sure you'd agree it's not isolated. In fact, it represents the latest escalation in Russia's campaign of attacks on Central and Eastern European NATO allies. Just last year, shopping centres in Vilnius and Warsaw were set on fire, and the leaders of those countries pointed the finger very firmly at Russian military intelligence. Just last week, a jet carrying the President of the European Union suffered a cyber attack which was initiated by Russia. They're clearly not deterred by the current measures in place. So as a leading military power in Europe and in NATO, could the Minister outline to me what we can do to enhance and reinforce the capabilities of our NATO allies who are on the front line of this confrontation with Russia?
Minister.
I can tell the honourable member we're doing that right now. The Defence Industrial Strategy, the Strategic Defence Review, industrial rebuild will ensure that we have the right arms and enough of them to reinforce the deterrence and, if called to, fight and win.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Russian drones over Poland suggest that Putin is testing NATO's resolve to support its members. Can the Minister push the Prime Minister to urge President Trump and the members of the G7 to produce a cohesive plan to seize the $300 billion in frozen Russian assets held in their countries and funnel this money to the Ukraine front line? That money would then transform Zelensky's efforts to repel Putin's illegal war machine. Will the government commit to doing this?
Minister.
The United States is one of our most critical allies, and when the President of the United States visits the UK, there will be a multitude of different discussions, particularly focused on Ukraine, European security, and of course NATO.
Adam Dance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister agree that we need to take stronger steps to deter Putin, and that starts with seizing billions in frozen Russian assets across the UK and using them to support Ukraine in its fight against Russia, because Putin has showed if you give him an inch, he'll take a mile?
Minister.
As mentioned previously, we've got to continue to push and pressure Putin to bring him to the peace table, and that contains a whole suite of different capabilities, whether that's providing arms to Ukraine all the way through to sanctions, and we'll continue to do so.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Russian drones over Poland were tracked by Polish aircraft, but also by Dutch aircraft that are stationed in Poland. And it reminds us that 4 years ago, Putin sought a rollback in NATO deployments from Central and Eastern Europe. In 2021, Russia demanded outrageously that NATO allies deploy no forces in countries that joined the alliance after 1997. Does the Minister agree that had the US acceded to those demands, we might be seeing devastating consequences in Poland today?
Minister.
So interesting, when we talk about deterrence, there are huge multinational NATO exercises that take place every year. I myself was the Chief of Staff of the Carrier Strike Group on 2021, the date you mentioned, which was Cold Response, which is the biggest naval exercise in several years to the High North. We demonstrate to Russia on multiple different occasions how effective the NATO alliance is, and if called to, how it will fight and win.
Van Merlo.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I give my thanks to the Polish and Dutch air crews who were involved in the defence of Poland's airspace last night. The seats in their jets may have been manufactured and tested in my constituency on Chargrove Airfield, but that airfield could be demolished thanks to proposals by Homes England to build a new town there. Will he meet with me to address urgently this threat to the UK national security?
Yes.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate the Honourable and gallant Minister for his elevation, well deserved. Also congratulate him on his comments and says he will not be intimidated. He speaks for us all. Indeed, I can almost feel a poster campaign coming on, and as it should be to stand firm. The incursion of Russian drones into a NATO member nation is a slap in the face of the very idea of NATO and must be dealt with effectively and immediately. What discussions will be had within NATO collectively to holding and determining a robust response to the testing of our borders and the resolution to stand fast against Russia? Thanks so much.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question and his support for defence. There are discussions ongoing in the E5 as we speak. The NAC has sat and will continue to discuss this issue, and I can guarantee you that the UK will be at the very centre of those discussions, and no one will intimidate this great isle at all.
That is the end of the urgent question on violation of Poland's airspace by Russian drones.
Point of order.
Point of order, Gregory Stafford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to seek your guidance on a matter which I believe constitutes a breach of the ministerial duty to respond to members' correspondence in a timely manner. On the 28th of November last year, I wrote to the now former Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology to raise concerns about the absence of legislation requiring service providers to give residents notice before installing large cables on their properties. Since then, I have followed up with the Department on the 22nd of January, the 20th of March, the 28th of April, the 13th of June and the 24th of July. It's now been 9 months without receiving a substantive reply. I understand the new Secretary of State is new in her job and I congratulate her for that, but this considerably hinders my ability to represent my constituents, and I seek your guidance on how we can get a response.
I am grateful to the honourable member for his point of order and for giving advance notice. Ministerial correspondence is not a matter for the Chair, that all honourable members should be entitled to expect a timely reply when they write to any member of the government. I can see the Treasury front bench nodding in agreement. I'm sure that the Treasury front bench will now make sure that the appropriate department and minister has been made aware and will respond to the honourable member's request as fast as they possibly can. Mr Corbyn, were you bobbing earlier for a point of order? Point of order, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish on a point of order to raise an apology to the House for inadvertently misleading the House yesterday during the debate on the Chagos Islands Bill, in which in column 816 of Hansard I was discussing the role of Olivier Bancoul in relationship with David Snoxall, who was the then High Commissioner to Mauritius, in which I said the latter's presence on David Snoxall Pressure on David Snoxall was enormous. He once went to the extent of locking him in his office until they had a proper meeting. I now have checked this with Mr Snoxall and I made a mistake there. The background facts are that in early November 2000, David Snoxall asked Olivier Bancoul and his committee to come and see him so that they could discuss with them the High Court judgment allowing them to return to the outer islands, and that was a perfectly friendly meeting. And then he goes on to say, I had several meetings over the next 4 years with Mr Bancoul and his committee members, and although Olivier regarded me as not on his side and occasionally denounced me in the press, he never locked me in my office. So I wanted the record to be corrected so that all can be satisfied that the truth has been told. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Well, I thank the right honourable member for giving notice of his point of order. I also thank him for correcting in so much detail the record at, of course, the earliest opportunity. No. I will let the front benches very quickly shuffle over before we get to the next set of business. To the presentation of bills, Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. I now move on to the 10-minute rule motion, neurodivergence screening and teacher training. And I go to Adam Dance.